Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. Like most people, you probably haven't been watching a lot of CNN lately, but you may have heard they staged a televised town hall meeting on gun control last night. It seemed like one of those cultural moments worth being aware of, and so for educational purposes, we want to show you a short clip of what happened. Here it is. Wait, sorry, I'm so sorry. That was actually the 2 minutes hate scene from 1984, the film version of George Orwell's novel. We got the footage confused. It was easy to do. Here's the CNN version of that.
I think what you're asking about is the assault weapons ban.
Yes, sir.
So let me be honest with you about that one. If I believed that that law would have prevented this from happening, I would support it. But I want to explain to you why it would not.
Can you tell me right now that you will not accept a single donation from the NRA in the future? I wish the NRA lady I could have talked to, because I would ask her how she can look in the mirror, considering the fact that she has children.
Let me answer the question. Let me answer the question. You can shout me down when I'm finished, but let me answer Emma's question. He should have been barred from getting a firearm, and he should not have been able to. He should not have been able to purchase the firearm. So if I could change time and change circumstances, I would have done everything in my power to prevent that.
You just told this group of people that you are standing up for them. You're not standing up for them until you say, I want less weapons.
I want to thank Dana Lash of the NRA and also Sheriff Scott Israel for being here to listen to your questions.
Emotions were inflamed, and obviously we understand why. But yelling and nastiness don't help anyone. It's precisely in times of tragedy and distress that we need the calmest and most thoughtful voices. CNN last night brought us the opposite. They did it to make money. But they also did it for ideological reasons. That wasn't a town hall meeting, and it certainly wasn't a news event. It was an act of ritual public humiliation for anybody who disagrees with CNN's transparently clear position against gun rights. Dana Lash was there last night. She was the one you just saw being called a murderer on stage. She spoke about her experience earlier today.
Many in legacy media love mass shootings. You guys love it. Now, I'm not saying that you love the tragedy, but I am saying that you love the ratings. Crying white mothers are ratings gold to you and many in the legacy media in the back. And notice I said crying white mothers, because there are thousands of grieving black mothers in Chicago every weekend, and you don't see town halls for them, do you?
Well, she's certainly right about the deep corruption of the news media. How corrupt? Well, Colton Hobb, a JROTC cadet who helped lead students to safety during the shootings in Florida last week, went to the CNN event last night, or wanted to. He says CNN producers rewrote the question he wanted to ask. CNN denies scripting anything. In other words, they're claiming that Colton Hobb is a liar. Colton Hobb joins us tonight. Colton, thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for having me. And before we get into anything, I just want to make sure that everybody hasn't forgotten why we are actually here tonight. I mean, we lost 17 lives last week, and
yes,
I actually physically put 2 to rest, and to me that was the hardest thing in the world to endure. I mean, nobody should have to go through this, so as long as we're taking the right steps to move forward from this and make sure that this doesn't happen again, I'm all for that.
Well, we certainly haven't forgotten. Thank you for reminding us yet again, and we think that the only way to make the country better and maybe put a dent in this scourge is to have a rational, thoughtful conversation about what to do next. And with that in mind, absolutely, you were planning to go to this event last night. And tell me if I'm mischaracterizing any of this. And you sent in, at the request of a CNN producer, you sent in a number of questions, statements you wanted to make, questions that you wanted to ask of the politicians on the stage. And they rewrote one of your questions? Is that right?
Yes, sir. So what had happened was 4 days ago, I had gotten contacted by a lady named Carrie Stevenson from CNN. she had asked me originally to just write a speech. It was going to be at the town hall at the BB&T Center, so I agreed. I felt like it would be the right thing to do, be able to go speak my part, as well as open eyes to a few things that I thought that could make this situation a little better. From there, 3 days ago, so the next day after that, we had gotten, I got an email back from her, and she asked for more of questions rather than a speech, which I was totally fine with. So I wrote a little less of a speech and more of questions that I wanted to ask at the town hall. The day after that, it was more of just questions. She asked for just questions that I would like to ask. So I gave her my questions, and then yesterday at about 5:15, I made contact with her, and she had asked if I just asked her one question. So what they had actually done was wrote out a question for me, because in my interview with CNN, I had talked about arming the teachers if they were willing to arm themselves in the school to carry on campus. And they had, she had taken that of what I had briefed on and actually wrote that question out for me. So I have that question here if you'd like me to ask it for you.
Well, but I just want to make sure I have this straight. So you sent them a long, in effect, essay on what you thought, but they put
Yes,
their
sir.
own words in the question, and they weren't the same as the words you had sent in? They were the producer's words?
Absolutely. They had taken what I had wrote and what I had briefed on and talked about, and they actually wrote the question for me.
But not with your words. I mean, they put their own words into your question, even after they'd asked you to send questions in. But that seems dishonest.
It definitely did, and that's kind of why I didn't go last night. Originally, I had thought that it was going to be more of my own question and my own say, and then it turned out to be more of just a script. And she had actually said that over the phone, that I needed to stick to the script.
That's remarkable. What did you watch last night?
I watched a little bit of it. I kind of felt like I didn't really need to, because I knew that as soon as what had happened with me, that it was going to be more scripted and wasn't actually going to be actual questions. Then I didn't feel the need to fully watch it.
So if CNN was willing to reword your question, put their own words in your mouth, and as you said, you didn't want to go along with that, do you think they did that to other people last night?
I mean, absolutely. From what I did see, I had seen a couple people that had asked questions before I did leave my house. And it was a little piece of paper cut out. And I know for a fact that nobody cut their own paper out and wrote their own question, especially when they were all based off the same topic. So to me, from right there, it showed that this isn't correct. Why are they all have the same size piece of paper with a short little question on it? So to
I guess
me, it was a total
what's
waste of
surprising is
my time,
you're not just some person off the street. You're a survivor of this shooting, and the point was to listen to you, to the survivors of the shooting. Were you surprised by the way they
Absolutely.
behaved?
I mean, honestly, it was very shocking to me, because we just went through such a horrific tragedy. For them to take that and now make such a big news cast over what they want to hear, it was very upsetting to me.
It's shocking to us too, trust me, in the actual journalism business. Colton, thank you. Thank you for telling us that. It's really interesting.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Godspeed.
Absolutely.
We've got new information tonight about the Parkland shooting itself. Stoneman Douglas High School had an armed guard on the scene, it turns out, during the shooting. When the shooting happened, that guard remained outside, did nothing, and waited for police. Of course, by the time police arrived, it was too late to save the 17 people who had been murdered. This is just one more layer of government failure in the Parkland shooting. There are a number of them. The FBI had 2 credible leads. It balked. The police visited the shooter's house more than 3 dozen times and in the end did nothing. The student had been suspended for fighting an assault but never referred to prosecutors. If he had a felony conviction, it might have barred him from getting a gun. Over and over again, the government failed to protect the people of Florida, those kids, the ones who died, either because of incompetence or the sheer impossibility of catching every threat. And now they're telling us to disarm. Gary Farmer is a Florida state senator and a gun control advocate who met with students in Tallahassee yesterday. He joins us tonight. Senator, thank you for coming on. This new news does raise the question, though. Why aren't we talking about government's failures? Why are we talking about stripping the ability of citizens to defend themselves when it's clear the government can't defend us and didn't in this case?
Thank you for having me, Tucker. I don't this new information about the guard and what he did or didn't do is just breaking, but I don't think it's indicative of the government's failure to protect us. I did tour Stoneman Douglas High School last week. We were briefed on specifics of the shooting, and the shooter went up to a third-floor perch and was attempting to shoot out hurricane windows so that he could become a sniper from that top floor. So I'm not sure why this officer did or did not go into the building. But I would agree with you, the government has failed us in allowing the proliferation of assault weapons.
Well, but wait a second. I'm sorry, Senator. I can't let you just. Okay. I realize that you have an agenda here. But from the perspective of citizens who are watching this on television, my agenda is to tell the truth and to make sure people can protect themselves, because it's pretty clear from the repeated failures of government, local, state, federal, FBI, local police, armed security guards, that the government didn't protect those people and they died. And now you're looking into the camera and saying you don't have a right to protect yourself. You're the threat. People who've done nothing wrong, who just want to protect their families, they're the ones who should suffer for this. And I'm wondering why. Why would you say that, given what the evidence Tucker, I just threw at you?
Tucker, that's such a gross simplification, and it's almost laughable, but for the fact that so many people have died, the fact that you are sitting here saying that if 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 more people had been armed, that this would have been different.
But I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the government failed, and the government officials like you don't want to admit it.
Tucker, so if you could let me finish my point, I was there at that school. You weren't. I was briefed by FBI and special forces that are doing the forensics there.
So what's the answer?
This man fired 160 bullets in about an 8-minute time frame. Okay, so this is a very large campus. Whether this guard went in or didn't, the fact of the matter is most of the carnage occurred before he ever had an opportunity to be there to stop it.
Well, how do you know? Wait, slow down. Don't. You know what? Hold on. You're not entitled to make up facts. You just said that you knew nothing about it, and now you're telling me. Then if you don't know the facts, then why are you saying the security guard didn't have time to stop the shooting? You don't know that. You're making it up.
We do know he was on the other side of the campus. If you read the reports and speak to the officers as I have, you would know.
You said you just learned this.
When did another side of the campus? Oh. Tucker, can I finish? I know you like to interrupt people, but God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. So if you could let me finish.
What you're doing
we know
is
that this
evading responsibility for the role of government
on the other
here.
side of a large campus. Okay. He went to the building when he could. But we also know from the forensics that this man, this disturbed young man, fired 78 shots on the first floor alone within about 2-3 minutes.
Wait, can I just? I'm sorry. I can't let you look.
160 bullets with magazines that hold 30 and 40 bullets.
I got it. We're all aware of that. Let's address what we're. Speaking of filibustering,
there is no self-defense purpose for those magazines.
Oh, there's no self-defense purpose.
If he would have been limited,
you would know
to
that,
a less
I guess.
Harmful. Right. Not a war of weapon.
This is just
perhaps
you're reading your
the guard could have gone in and made a difference.
Then let me ask you, why did local police show up at his house 39 times and do nothing? Do you have an excuse for that, or the fact that the FBI was alerted and ignored it? Are you willing to excuse that too?
I'm not making excuses
for
anything.
You just made an excuse for the security guard not protecting the kids.
And how assault weapons are the common denominator.
Oh no! Actually, in this case,
shootings.
What you're doing is shifting responsibility away from yourself and your fellow government leaders onto the rest of us.
All you want to do is pivot away from assault weapons as being the root common denominator of all these events.
I think our viewers can assess who you are and where you're coming from. Let's talk about guns.
The discussion
Let's talk
away
about guns.
From those guns.
Since you, like many government officials, will never take responsibility for anything, let me ask you about the bill that you supported that would address the gun problem you claim is paramount. So I think that bill just was voted down in the Florida House a couple of days ago, but you still supported it. So you tell me
first of all, I'm in the Florida Senate, not in the Florida House.
Well, I'm aware, but
the bill
that
was voted down in the Florida House. What happened in the Florida House was
let me ask
the
you
Florida
about,
House, much like you and other commentators, are afraid to have the discussion.
Let's discuss the bill that you support, SB 196.
Just to have a discussion about the issue.
Let me
we
ask
want
you
to
about
talk
the
about
bill.
the
Right.
proliferation of these guns and their involvement in these mass shootings. And everybody wants to pivot away from that
give
discussion
up on this, Senator.
to something
I'm trying
else.
to ask you about the bill that you support and details in it, assuming you know them. I doubt that. Let's find out.
I
in
wrote
that
the bill. I wrote the
Then let me
bills,
ask you a
Tucker.
couple
Have you read
questions
them?
about it. Yes, I have.
What's the bill
and let
number,
me ask
Tucker?
you.
What's the bill number?
SB 196.
What's the bill number you're talking about?
196. I win the quiz. I get an A. Let me ask you a question.
Magazine ban. I'm ready to go. Let's go.
Okay. So in this bill, owners of the rifles, including many hunting rifles that you designate weapons of war and assault rifles, people who own
Not
them
true,
now,
but keep going. Misinformation number one.
Is true.
Keep going.
Would have to register those rifles with the government. Am I misreading that?
No, that's a different bill. That's a different bill, Tucker. That's 1476. That's the bill to create the gun registry. Why don't you have to register a gun when we register cars and
so
boats
I would
and
have
other
to take my rifle, having done nothing wrong.
I don't know. But no, the assault weapons bill
wrong,
196 doesn't have the registry in it.
And I would have to, under the bill you supported, the gun registry bill, I would have to register bills in my house, despite the fact I've committed no crime, done nothing untoward with that gun, and I have to register it with you and other government officials who just failed.
And what's wrong with that, Tucker? Why does law enforcement, why are they unable to have the tools available to them?
I don't know. They were unable to stop
prevent
the guy
mass
who just
shootings
killed 17
or to find the
people.
perpetrators of those mass shootings. What is everybody afraid of with a gun registry? If you're not committing a crime,
that demagogues like you will misuse that information. And after talking to you for a few minutes, that is a legitimate fear.
Continue the narrative, please. How so?
Here's the narrative. The government, as I said, at every level, and this is factual, not my opinion, failed to protect those students. You will not concede that and instead turn the blame back on blameless American citizens.
That's not factual.
Oh, the security guard had a good reason. The FBI, whatever, 39 times to his house, whatever. Giving people like you power is frightening. That's the bottom line. And I'm out because I can't get a straight answer from you.
If a shooter...
Sorry. Author and columnist Mark Stein joins us tonight. Great to see you, Mark.
Okay. By the way, we had a gun registry up in Canada that was a complete fiasco. It turned out to be, it got completely infected with inaccurate information, and I think the Canadian taxpayers wound up spending $600 per gun registration because it became just another pointless, inaccurate government boondoggle.
But why is it that the people... Look, I mean, there are a lot of reasons these things happen, and ultimately they're the fault of the guy who does it, the guy who pulls the trigger. But if government is telling you, we can keep you safe, you have no right to protect yourself, we're going to protect you, and then they don't, and then they won't admit that they didn't, and then they persist in trying to prevent you from protecting yourself, doesn't that suggest that maybe something's not on the level here?
Yes, and I think actually this gets to the heart of it. If you were to look at this school cop, so-called, if his behavior is as reported, is a very good example of what happens when you massively expand law enforcement. The proportion of bad police, the police who let you down, will increase, and it will eventually be like the TSA when you go to the conveyor belt and get your take your shoes off, and there's 9 people standing around. But how many of them would actually respond effectively in a bad situation? That's the first problem. The second problem is that if you were serious about gun control, you'd have to change the minds of tens of millions of American, law-abiding American citizens. So you would not stage the spectacle that CNN staged last night, which brought back memories to me of the Paul Wellstone funeral 15 years ago. You remember a senator, he died in a plane crash, very sad. They held a funeral and turned it into an ugly partisan political reality. Speaking as a foreigner, you know, Americans, private gun ownership is central to Americans' sense of themselves in a way that it is not to Australians, for example. And that to change that requires calm, thoughtful, rational debate rather than emotional exhibitionism of the kind on display last night.
I think you made the key point right there, which is you need to convince people you can't change hundreds of years of law and custom simply by fiat or screaming or threatening people. In a democracy, you have to bring people along with you. You have to not compel them, but convince them. And the left doesn't seem interested in that at all.
No, and I think this is actually where it's going. Well, I would say, for example, that if you look at Germany and Scandinavia, where police chiefs tell women that it's not safe to go out alone at night since they let all the refugees into the country, you have declining social trust, which is likely to move Europeans back towards a self-defense model. Now, you have declining social trust is one of the phenomena of our times here in America. And when people look at that incompetent and weaselly sheriff last night battering Dana Lash, who's a private citizen, because she wants to know why he didn't act on any of those 39 complaints, people are not willing to mortgage their self-defense rights to the government, and not a government as inept as all levels of whether it's school district, sheriff, or federal. All levels of government failed in Florida.
That's exactly right. If you're telling me I can't defend myself, you're going to protect me, you better prove you can, and they're not. Mark, that was really deep and smart. Thank you, as always.
Thanks a lot, Tucker.
Last week's shooting is being blamed on so-called toxic masculinity. What exactly is that? We've asked the question many times, still don't know. Hopefully we'll find out next.
Tucker Carlson.
The Parkland, Florida shooting isn't just being blamed on guns, but also on men. Not simply the man who did it or the many men who failed to prevent it, but all men, half the population. Nicholas Cruz was, by all accounts, pretty disturbed, but articles in Refinery 29, USA Today, and something called HuffPo argue that the real root of his violent rampage is something called toxic masculinity. It's not in the DSM. It's a new made-up term, but it's everywhere all of a sudden. The desire to murder others, the theory goes, stems from the masculine desire to control women that for some can only be expressed through violence. Nell Daly is a psychotherapist and hosts Unscripted with Nell Daly, and she joins us tonight. Nell, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Tucker, for having me.
So, I mean, maybe it's not surprising, but I'm drawing kind of the opposite conclusion here. This kid, the murderer, seems like he suffered from a lack of wholesome masculinity. He didn't have a male role model. He wasn't self-sufficient. He wasn't sort of living up to the classical masculine ideal of providing for others, of being a man. He seems quite the opposite of that. So how is this the result of masculinity?
You know, well, let's go back to the idea of what toxic masculinity is. And as I dug through this story to do this segment tonight, I'm still struggling to get my head around the concept, even though I've been familiar with it for a while. It's a very hard and nuanced thing to articulate. And I also want to make it clear that the Refinery 29 article and feminists that are talking about toxic masculinity aren't saying that that's the sole reason why he committed the crimes that he committed. There's several factors obviously involved. Let's talk about what toxic masculinity is and how I understand it. For example, sometimes when I'm on your show, I get death threats, right? Even if it's not a contentious debate, I'll get reposted and I'll get, at times, 3,000 men will come out with sort of violent words on Facebook or accusations towards me that are pretty scary. That's an example of toxic masculinity showing itself, manifesting in our society.
Right.
Also, another example of toxic masculinity, though, is when we shut down boys from actually having feelings. And that's different than the toxic environments or toxic messaging that little boys get through, let's say, certain types of music or video games that they're exposed to on a daily basis. So I just want to make it clear, like, that's what we're talking about when we talk about toxic masculinity.
Is there such a thing as toxic femininity? Can you be too feminine or just too masculine? When I was talking to people about
doing this segment today, people were asking me about that. No, and that's because women don't commit these violent crimes at the rate that men do. So since
they don't commit much violence at all.
Right. So since like I don't think women are sexually threatening you necessarily after you do the show.
No. But that because those are classically male ways of acting out in a bad way. But are there female ways? Is there? In other words, I guess we're stipulating that you can be too masculine and you wind up killing people. Can you be too feminine, or is it only boys who are bad when they act as nature created them.
I appreciate what the questions and the line that you're going in. I actually want to get back to the point that you originally brought up, which I think is fascinating. And there was an article published today in The Federalist, which I believe is a conservative blog by a guy named Jason Hansen. And he suggests that exactly what you said at the beginning, could this actually be a result of a lack of healthy masculine role models in our society that causes what he suggests or alludes to is this idea of the revenge of the lost boys? Right. And that goes back to exactly your first point, Tucker.
Well, there's something going on there, and we're doing a whole series on this next month. I don't fully understand it. I don't want to pretend that I do. But there's something about constantly attacking boys for being boys, which is what our society obviously specializes in, that causes them in some cases to embrace this kind of caricature of masculinity, which is violent and grotesquely sexualized. It's a parody of masculinity. And I think maybe that's a response, at least in part, to the attacks on boys for being boys. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do see what you're saying. And I think what's interesting here, and it's really, really sad as a mother, is that we are starting to, there's been so many shootings that we're able, as a psychotherapist in the psychological community, actually create psychological profiles on data on why these men commit these kinds of crimes. And one of them is domestic violence. A second thing that goes back to what you were just saying is that a lot of them have a lack of a male model figure in their family life. So it's a very complex issue, and I don't think it's one thing or the other, but just the fact that we're talking about this in 2018 on Fox News tonight and discussing gender and identity and ideas around masculinity shows that as a society, as a country, we're facing a human crisis. And one of the things that's being brought to head is these discussions about what is a new masculine identity or a paradigm shift that's happening in our culture.
Yeah, maybe having a dad at home, maybe pretending that wasn't a big deal was a mistake.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of single moms out there raising kids, and obviously we're starting to see some issues, arising from these things when we don't have
some of us called that, but
models.
Whatever. All right, Nell, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Bill Kristol's effort to fight Russian fake news seems to be spreading fake news of its own. Who could have predicted that? Glenn Greenwald joins us to discuss the details next. Weekly Standard founder and Twitter enthusiast Bill Kristol has helped launch a venture you probably never heard of. It's called Hamilton 68, and it's designed, they claim, to combat Russian disinformation on Twitter. But it's having a bit of a hard time and seems to be spreading disinformation of its own. For example, Hamilton 68 was behind the claim that the Release the Memo campaign to expose FISA abuse by the FBI was just a Russian plot with no support from actual Americans. Glenn Greenwald has been covering this. He writes The Intercept. He's a critic of widespread hysteria on this question, and he joins us tonight. Glenn, this is one of those many stories that fall through the cracks in a news environment like this, and that's why I'm grateful you have been on this. What is Hamilton 68, and what has it done?
So I wrote about it when it was formed not even a year ago, last summer, because it was yet another example, probably the most vivid one yet, of this kind of union between Democrats on the one hand and neocons on the other. I guess I should say reunion, since neocons began as Democrats, migrated to Republicans, and are now back with Democrats again. And it's essentially a group that was, as you said, started by people like Bill Kristol, people who have been leading neocons from both political parties, CIA officials, the people who basically have been disseminating disinformation throughout the entire war on terror, the least reliable, most warmongering people in Washington. And they said that their purpose of their group was to combat disinformation and the attack on the American democracy by Russia and other groups. And their main kind of feature was that they would have this dashboard called Hamilton 68 that purported to track the activity of Russian influencers on Twitter by tracking 600 accounts. Nobody knows which accounts they've designated as influence of Russia. They're not necessarily Russian. They're just people who, in the eyes of Bill Kristol and his friends, are people who espouse Russia or pro-Russia themes. And they just constantly make claims about what Russia is doing on Twitter that the U.S. media, in the most shocking way, uncritically ingest and puts into their headlines as fact about what Russia is doing.
So they're basically running their own propaganda campaign purportedly designed to combat propaganda. What's the agenda behind this? I'm a little confused by it.
It's twofold. One is these are the people who have actually been obsessed with the idea that we should be at war with Russia for forever. Back in 2008, when the president of Georgia attacked two provinces that viewed themselves as more aligned with Russia, and the Russians went and confronted the Georgian government about it, people like John McCain and Marco Rubio and that whole neocon crowd, Bill Kristol, were essentially calling for NATO to go to war with Russia over Georgia. They've been obsessed with Russia forever and have wanted the reinvigoration of a new Cold War. That's part of it. And then the second part is domestic, which is that whatever views they dislike, namely on the left wing of the party that's anti-imperialism and anti-war, the left wing of the Democratic Party, or the kind of isolationist, paleo-conservative wing or libertarian wing of the Republican Party, they want to smear as being aligned with the Kremlin. So whatever views are on the right wing of the party, like release the memo, or on the left wing of the party, like, you know, anything relating to Bernie Sanders, they'll just declare to be a theme of Russia and then accuse everybody who advocates it, Americans who advocated on Twitter, of being part of a Kremlin disinformation campaign.
You and I are on different sides, and we both had that happen to us, so we know firsthand. Thank you, Glenn, for that. I appreciate it. What's it like trying to survive as a free-thinking person in Silicon Valley? Not easy. Fired Google employee James Damore will be here next.
Diabetes can be a...
How hard is it to think independently, to think for yourself in Silicon Valley? Well, nobody knows the answer to that question better than James Damore. He's the Google employee who was fired because he dared to believe his employer meant it when they said they were committed to diversity, the open exchange of different views. They don't believe in that, and they fired him for it. Now he is suing the company, Google, for discrimination, but doubtless many others like him remained in hiding in Silicon Valley. James Damore joins us tonight. James, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
So the deep irony is that you think of San Francisco, the Peninsula, the Bay Area, Silicon Valley as open-minded.
Right.
Has it do you think it's become more of a one-party state than it was a couple of years ago?
Yeah, definitely. Silicon Valley started as just sort of libertarian, open to many ideas, went to Burning Man all the time. But now it's really, there's a groupthink. And, you know, we see that many people are now leaving Silicon Valley because of this.
So since you were forced out of Google, not because you didn't perform well in your job, but because you tried to take them seriously when they said they believed in different views, and they don't, have you talked to people who are still there about it?
Yeah, I've talked to a few, and it seems like it's gotten even worse, where they've doubled down on some of this diversity rhetoric, and people are even more afraid now to speak up.
So if you have even a mildly different view, you're crushed.
Right. And so, you know, surveys show that about 80% of conservatives now don't want to talk about anything at work. So
I don't think anyone's ever challenged the fact that you're qualified for the job, highly qualified, you have a Harvard degree. Do you have a job now?
Fortunately, no. I've applied to many places, but you know, I think a lot of the large companies don't want the risk, and then the small companies want to be bought by Google, so they don't want to hire me either.
So Google's so powerful, you think they have a role in your not having a job now, even 6 months later, more than?
Yeah, people are definitely afraid of Google. It's the most powerful company in the world.
Do you think it's a good business model to be associated with an extreme set of political beliefs, Google, and as intolerant as they are? Is that a good way to kind of broaden your market share?
Definitely not. I think that they're really seeing the pushback from, you know, conservatives and free thinkers alike.
Yeah, normal people. Good luck, James. I really wish I had a technology company. I promise I would hire you tomorrow, but I'm just a talk show host. But you will get hired, and we're going to celebrate when you do. Thank you. Great to see you.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Up next, Final Exam, your weekly news quiz. Can you beat it? Time now for Final Exam, where we pit two news professionals against one another to see which of them has been paying closer attention. Heavy hitters this week. A Fox mainstay against one of his frequent guests. Bret Baier, one of the best informed news anchor in Washington, hosts Special Report. Molly Hemingway, noted intellectual and master of the incisive expository essay, is senior editor at The Federalist. Together, they make today's contestants. Welcome.
Thank you. You know how nervous we are collectively?
It's not good.
I'm nervous. I've got a lot of money on this. I'm not going to tell you who I bet on. Okay, here are the rules. You know them, but I'm going to repeat them for our viewers. Hands on buzzers. I ask the questions. First one to buzz in gets to answer. You have to wait till I finish asking the question in order to do that. Every correct answer is worth 1 point. Get one wrong, you lose a point. Best of 5 wins. Are you ready?
Ready.
Ready. All right, question 1. Fergie, the singer, upset a lot of people this week with her jazzy and sultry rendition, we're being generous there, of the national anthem. At which game did that performance take place? Brett Baer.
Fergie sang at the basketball game.
Almost there, at the basketball game. Now, we're going to roll the tape and then ask our judges if your answer is adequate.
I thought you needed the specific
game. I'm not the judge. I'm merely the... I'm the marionette.
I had a good answer.
Would you like to get more specific?
Forgot. No, let's just roll the tape.
Okay, let's roll the tape. Basketball game.
Good news is everyone stood for the national anthem last night at the NBA All-Star game, but some couldn't stand what they were hearing.
Does that star spangled banner yet wave?
She sounds like a sober Janis
I
Joplin.
meant all-star. I mean, it was inferred.
Okay, so I'm merely a marionette who takes directions from the puppet masters in New York, and I'm going to ask them now, is basketball game adequate? No.
Oh.
Sorry.
So I get a minus?
You get a minus.
Oh, dear.
That seems unfair.
All right.
You're headed in the same direction as Bitcoin tonight. Okay. Question 2. Apple is moving its employees into a $5 billion spaceship-like campus, but the glass walls are causing a painful problem for its workers. What is that problem? Molly Hemingway.
This breaks my strategy. You're not supposed to answer if you don't know the answer.
That's true, like the SAT.
I'm just going to go with glare.
Glare. Is it glare?
The number of employees walking into the curved glass walls there has gotten so bad, emergency services had to be called. Workers are saying, hey, we're going to put sticky notes on some of these glass walls and doors so people don't walk into them. Apparently, reportedly, their bosses took the sticky notes off because it ruined the design and the look of the building.
So they're like birds.
They're like your cat. Yeah, they run right into it. So for the first time in the 35-year history of this show, or 3-month-long, or however long it's been, we have a tie of -1 to -1.
Hence,
I want to see how low we can go.
Exactly. You had every reason to be. All your fears were true. There is a monster in the closet.
Not here. Okay.
Question 3. That's a good point. After a 20-year drought, which women's Olympic team brought home the gold today after a close match against Canada? Can't buzz early. Brett, you get to answer first because Molly Hemingway, you buzzed early.
Awesome. U.S. women's hockey team.
U.S. women's hockey team against Canada.
Gold medal winning hockey players are in the house. Hi, you guys.
You know what's better than a gold medal? 23 gold medals.
So the good news is you're winning. The bad news is you're at 0 anyway. You're at 0.
It's all relative.
It's absolutely right. You don't have to be the fastest. You just can't be the slowest. Question 4.
Here we go.
Which Hollywood actress announced this week she'll be giving up her acting for a year to focus on fixing our democracy? Brett Baer.
Jennifer Lawrence.
Not aware of her as an actress, but we're going to see if you're correct. Jennifer Lawrence is the answer. Roll tape, please.
She's got a big new movie coming out at the box office, but Jennifer Lawrence won't be acting anymore for a while because she's decided to become a full-time activist.
Stuff trying to pass state-by-state laws that can help prevent corruption, fix our democracy.
So now that she's no longer going to be doing movies, what are you going to do in the weekends, Brett?
I don't know. I have no clue.
That's good. Okay. I'm not good at math, so I don't know where we are, but I know this is the final question. Are you ready?
Oh.
I know, it goes fast on this show. Final exam. Jaws dropped at London Fashion Week after a very important person, a famous one, sat next to Vogue editor Anna Wintour, who was also important and famous, or at least famous. People are upset with Wintour for not taking off her sunglasses and are even calling her disrespectful. Who was the head of state who sat next to her? Molly Hemingway.
It was the Queen.
The Queen of?
Queen Elizabeth.
Not Brunei. England.
Yes.
Queen Elizabeth. Is it Queen Elizabeth?
Queen Elizabeth. Well, she has never wavered in her fashion sense. Her Majesty making her Fashion Week debut on Tuesday, sitting next to the grande dame of all things stylish, Vogue editor-in-chief Anna Wintour at British designer Richard Quinn's runway show.
You are right.
Good.
But still lose.
Out of the
And as our
hole, though.
judges just said, if it weren't for that technical error, we might have a tie right now.
Yeah.
We'd be in tie-breaking territory. And you have to guess the capital of Namibia, but we're not. Molly, you were great. Thank you. That was valiant. But, Brett, you won. Congratulations.
Thank you, with 1 point.
With 1 point. But it's all it takes.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's it for this week's final exam. Pay attention to the news every week. Tune in every Thursday to see if you can do better than our trained news professionals. There's a lot more coming up. Stay tuned.
If you've been struggling with belly pain and